In the meantime, let's move to our next session here at Conference 2023, the future thinking of mutual aid. We're joined by Steve Taylor, Operational Policing Lead, National Board Member of the Federation, and Richie Murray, Deputy Health and Safety Lead and National Board Member too. Welcome to you both.
Thank you very much.
Steve, would you like to start us off?
I will. The irony of sticking me on just before lunch isn't lost, particularly when we've had such a powerful conference up to date with some really moving stuff. But bear with us. We've got some important information to share with you.
Okay.
And mutual aid, like our members that provide it, does come in all shapes and sizes, be it single figure officers being deployed to a part of the country or indeed internationally to offer a bit of support, to officers in the tens or hundreds, perhaps going over to the Caribbean to offer some disaster relief, to mobilising officers in their thousands to provide support to nationally and internationally important events. Mutual aid is the vehicle that our police service uses to provide that work. So it's a really important, if not niche, element of what we do. And if you hold a skill set, you could be used on mutual aid. It's not just about public order or firearms, as we've seen. It covers the whole panoply of skills. So mutual aid does have the ability to touch every one of our members. We are behind all of those deployments as well. Traditionally, the Fed have always been present, but it tended to be one of the 43 branches that was perhaps hosting. It tended to be a local niche type of Fed involvement, often in the planning, maybe flying the flag on during the event itself. And then in recent times, we had a quite challenging deployment, not too far away from my home force, where a visiting president arrived and some planning assumptions had been made, the use of some partners in the military to provide, in quite short notice, a first-size deployment. Coincided with much of the Fed leadership nationally and locally being away at some National Bravery Awards. And some of those assumptions failed. We had members sleeping on, in gymnasiums and squash courts. We had less than satisfactory eating arrangements. And we had 43 lots of our members reporting back to 43 forces with 43 lots of issues. There was a built-in inconsistency. And the amount of time that force spent trying to deconflict some of those inconsistencies was valuable time that should have been fighting the actual fires of the deployment. So we took a step back from that and we realised, there's a space here for the Fed to be more prominent on behalf of our members when it comes to mutual aid. Previously, a lot of hard work had gone into the mutual aid space, but by and large, behind the scenes and in the shadows. And so the consistent themes that come out of every deployment, your accommodation, your food, your allowances, we were getting these consistently wrong. And with a lack of a little bit of effort and application, we decided that we could strive for more consistency there. And it's that striving for consistency that Rich and I are keen to touch on today. We're going to talk about a couple of areas which FedReps currently operate in and provide support. And then we're going to touch on a couple more areas where we'd like to provide more and we're aiming to provide more consistency going forward. So the first area is the deployment of FedReps to support mutual aid. We're going to touch on what that presently looks like. Richie's then going to give us the first of a couple of inputs onto the welfare vans and their continued use in the current climate. We're then going to talk about a very important document, the Framework of Principles, which many of our members might be unaware of, but which is a key tool in helping us deliver consistency for our members. We'll then move over into what we're trying to work on for the future and going forward. We're going to talk about the wellbeing impact assessments, which again, many of our members might never have heard of, but a really important tool. Richie's going to talk to us about mutual aid liaison officer training and FedRep training. We're going to have another look at the future of welfare vans and what they provide for our membership. And then last, but by no means least, we're going to talk about the future of allowances and how they impact on our members. So the first of those is us always learning from current FedRep deployments. So this is taking an opportunity presented by the COP26 deployment, when a cold couple of weeks in November saw thousands of our members travel north of the border to the central belt of Scotland to deliver an international climate change conference. On its busiest day, over 10,000 officers were deployed, at the time the single biggest policing deployment. And there's a couple of challenges right out the gate. There's no local Fed as we would recognise it from a PFEW point of view, because of course our colleagues in Scotland, it's their own legal jurisdiction, they have their own federation, they work to their own rules. So right from the get-go, we were able to provide a PFEW team into the planning stages of that deployment. And we deployed for the first time a fairly sizable Fed contingent on the ground to support officers that were heading north to support that operation. We had some branded clothing, we took the welfare vans, and we deployed up there for around 3 weeks. The primary purpose being, in that ill-fated presidential visit where we had 43 lots of feedback to 43 forces, that resulted in 43 forces all contacting the organisers with 43 different questions. And that time spent working through that could have all been saved if we had boots on the ground, if we had Fed reps on the ground at the front, at the pointy end, to take these concerns and work with them and prevent those 43 local branches having to give potentially 43 different answers. So you can see the consistency theme. We moved on a couple of months later. We had the G7. Yep. We went down to the lovely Carbis Bay in Cornwall there for another internationally important deployment, 6,500 officers. And we started to build and learn these lessons and try and strive for consistency. But again, accommodation was an issue. Allowances was an issue. And for the first time, we were really made cognizant of the business as usual element of a mutual aid deployment being an issue, by which I mean local members providing business as usual policing in Cornwall were negatively impacted by the deployment, we would say. And so what support could we offer them? The local Fed did a sterling job leading that deployment, and we were able to offer some national support. And again, that model proved to be successful, we would say, with Unity in the Commonwealth Games, 3,000 of our members deploying up to that job. And such was the journey we'd been on. We were able to demonstrate at the Commonwealth Games where planning assumptions had been made and a provision put in place. When that provision failed to deliver, as it did, accommodation-wise, cleaning-wise, food-wise, we were able to support the local force and the Fed in saying, it's not our issue, we've made the right assumptions, we've put the right service in place, it's the provision of that service that's fell over. And for the first time, it wasn't local Feds getting it in the neck, or even local forces. We were able, legitimately and robustly, to say, that's a third-party provider that's let us down. And we were speaking with one voice on the issue, which was refreshing and isn't always the case. So we've taken that model and we continue to develop it and harness it. We've seen other deployments since, over to Northern Ireland with Rondoletto, of course, Golden Orb, and Her Majesty's funeral and His Majesty's coronation. And integral to the Fed deployment on mutual aid through all those has been welfare vans. And so I'd like to hand over to Richie just to tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, moving on to the welfare vans. We could say many years have passed where we've been on deployments, either mutual aid deployments, local deployments, enforced football matches, etc., or scene preservations and guards, where officers has been stood on scenes. There have been guards in rural areas where there's no facilities. They could be there for hours on end in the bad inclement weather. It could be the opposite. It could be really hot and warm, and there's no place for shade or warmth or anywhere to use facilities, i.e. the toilets, or just get a hot drink. So it was a few forces in the beginning. It was about 5 years ago. Decided actually, let's bring in these welfare vans, And the welfare vans came into fruition in different types. So what they had was some vans were kitted with, as we say, facilities which had seating facilities inside, hot water, microwave so they could have meal, a restroom where they could sit there, they could have a toilet facility, and they could, part of it, even have televisions and for respites on a break. So it gave the officers on the ground somewhere to go, because in the past, and I've known it myself, I've been on scenes on a bridge in Cardiff, and there was no facilities, and you stood there and you can't be relieved, or when you do get relieved, you have to travel half an hour to a facility, then to come back. So the logistics side of it would become quite a nightmare for the forces there. So we decided to raise these vans and look at the potential of what these vans can do. And one of the bigger ones was, as Steve rightly said, COP26. We deployed probably about 7 vans, went up to COP26 from England and Wales, these vans that were available. And they were situated from Glasgow to Edinburgh, all the way along. And they were called upon and used, rightly so, really well by the Scottish Federation, as well as the local federations that were there, and pinpointed the way we needed to be. Went down, should I say, a treat. And when we say they go down quite a treat, it means when we get letters back, because in policing, you're always criticised on a lot of things you do, but never rewarded. So it's really nice when you get letters back from the Scottish Police Federation and the Scottish Police themselves to say, thank you very much, it was really good. Without this, it made it easier. And it was the same with the Metropolitan during the, sadly, the Queen's funeral. We had a lot on there. So a lot of people will say to us, yeah, but isn't the welfare part of the force's responsibility? And yes, it is. And rightly so, and these welfare bans should be maybe paid by the force. But we know we're in situations now where actually some of the forces are going, yeah, we agree, but we just can't afford it. So some federations have gone in line with forces and group insurance schemes and got together and decided, let's get these vehicles together and use it for our officers. And as I've said, not always it's mutual aid. There could be scene guards and scene preservations where officers are stood on for days instead of sat in vehicles or stood at the end of a road on a tape barrier. They've actually somewhere to sit and keep warm. And for the rubber collars, it could be on road traffic collisions. They've seen them now where there's been major incidents on our roads, and sadly where people have lost their lives. There's somewhere where the team can sit, take statements, get what they need to do in an environment that's away from the public, away from viewing, etc. So they've gone on down really well. As I say, at the minute, I think there's over 16 vehicles now. We started off with only a couple. In the last 5 years, we've now gained to over 16, and some forces have actually got 2 because they're in those rural communities where you ain't going to get the facilities that you would do maybe in a big town or city. As I say, these vehicles are kitted, well kitted out at the moment, and we're striving to go forward. As I say, there was one on, Response Week the other week, earlier on in one of the sessions, and they were put out during Response Week, and they went round, and I know my own force, we went round, I took the van out and looked around and went round to the force, we had all the response officers there, and it was really good. And just touching on something, Steve, before we move on, was the business as usual. When we were deployed into the Met, it wasn't always deployed because you're going on a mutual aid. It was to assist the backlog, to go to the stations and say, thank you very much, and hand out simple chocolate bars, drinks, coffee to those people that are actually coming into work because they've had the rest days cancelled to cover the mutual aid. And there was a lot of officers in the Met that were cancelled and were doing big shifts, and it went down a treat, as we said. So welfare vans are the thing of the future.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree, Richie. I am an advocate for them. I know there's a very live argument out there that it shouldn't be the Fed that provides them. But what you can't deny is when we do provide them, it helps put the well-being and welfare of our officers during deployment front and centre into the mindset of operations. And I think Unity might be a good example of where that was taken on board, and we saw the organisation using pods and welfare pods and things. So I appreciate there's a view as to the legitimacy and who should be doing it. The fact is, when we do deploy them, they do have a positive impact. But I am slightly biased. If I could just move us on to the framework of principle. Now, that consistency that we strive for has been recognised in one of our partners and stakeholders, namely the MPOC, the National Police Coordination Centre. This is a body that sits in the centre of the country operationally, and on behalf of National Police Chiefs Council, delivers mutual aid deployments. And the superintendent there, Damien Kitchen, did a lot of work around trying to enshrine and get better consistency. He pulled together a framework aimed at delivering that, so that before a deployment, forces across there that are contemplating or needing to react to have a starter for 10 in terms of some basic fundamentals of mutual aid policing, by which I mean duty rosters, advice on allowances, accommodation standards, things like that. It's a living document, and there's a segment in there for international deployments and some of the unique challenges that that brings. And so for the first time, MPOC were really showing a bit of coordination and getting on the front foot. And like us, I believe, speaking for them, but the more of this work we can do before a deployment, the better for our members, the more informed they are when they come to volunteer their services, if that's appropriate. And so the framework of principles really helps us do that. We worked closely with them, and one of the things we were able to get included in that document are wellbeing impact assessments, which we're going to talk about later. Which we think we're excited about what that could deliver for our members. And also, they went out and got some legal advice themselves on the current application of our rules and regulations, particularly in the area of the overnight away from home allowance, off their own back, directly benefiting our members, getting us all on the same page, driving and striving for consistency. So that exists, and we'd like to see it become more widely used and more widely associated amongst the Fed reps. But if we were to perhaps move to what we're striving to do going forward and some of the improvements we're looking to bring, one of them has got to be those impact wellbeing assessments. We have an idea what they are, because that's language that we use in policing, particularly around equality. However, no one really knows what it means. And so we've taken the bull by the horns, and we're looking to drive forward. This is what our understanding of impact wellbeing assessments are. We just heard from Sue in the last segment. Sue is one of our leaders in the wellbeing area, and her team are working on the strategic questions around what an impact wellbeing assessment looks like. Now, whenever there's a mutual aid deployment, the host force has to submit some papers through the regional coordination centres into MPOC, requesting aid, be it regionally, locally, internationally. And so that goes through a process. What we're striving for is, at the earliest opportunity, well-being to be identified and an appropriate commander given responsibility for the well-being of officers at the strategic level. And Sue and the team are working on what are the 4 or 5 questions that need to be answered to inform that position right from the get-go. And then with our work on the mutual aid liaison, mutual aid working group, we're going to provide a tactical directory that's got to go through everything that possibly affects an officer when they are deployed abroad. Not unique to mutual aid, but if you are deployed on aid, these are all the things that might be a consideration. You know, laundry provision, spare time, transport to and from social events, Wi-Fi provision, meals, accommodation, allowances, as you'd expect. So that right from the get-go, the planners of such deployments have nowhere to hide should they be minded to say, oh, we didn't think about that until the 11th hour. Because right from the get-go, we're going to present it all on a plate. Consider these. Rule them out if you have to, but consider them. And then the final element of that wellbeing impact assessment is going to be a peer review by the local federation. Have you gone through the tactical directory? Have you considered? What's your rationale? So that as far downstream, as far early in the process as we can, our officers' well-being is front and centre when these operations are planned, rather than mend and make do, and we'll get to it if we can. We're putting it front and centre, which we're quite excited about, aren't we, Richie?
Absolutely, yeah.
And that only works if we've got a team of Fed reps and MPOC provide a team of mutual aid liaison officers to help deliver it on the ground. So So Richard, perhaps you want to tell us about...
Yeah, and like you said, moving on, like literally what Steve just said, the wellbeing impact assessment itself, there's so many things, but part of that is a mutual aid liaison officer. And these mutual aid officers normally are currently just picked by forces that are sending officers out of force. And they've just got to have a little bit of skill base that they look at. So the forces say, oh, have you done that before? Have you been in this department? Yeah, right, okay, you could probably cover that job. Oh, that's all well and being good having that skill. But actually, we've seen on big deployments where some of these officers have been sent there with no knowledge or no skill base. And actually, it becomes onus of the Federation then to take control. Well, that's not our role. So the main roles for these is a MALO is to keep in contact with MPOC, with the RIC, with the low host force, etc., and the donor forces, as well as the Federation. So they can go outside and be on deployment and be able to go, this is where you need to go, this is my point of contact. If anything goes wrong, this is what. One of the ones with earlier on was saying, actually we was in Scotland on the COP26, and during COVID times there was a repatriation, and it was a big thing that we had to get officers back to force, and it hadn't been really thought of, so it was trying to do. Part of that would be the MALO liaising with the Federation, liaising with the forces to get some transport to get these people back, because there always is. There may be some sad times. Officers need to get back, so these are that conduit. So we've looked at all of this and we've decided, actually, between ourselves and said, we need to think of some sort of training. So let's train our Fed reps, but also actually, let's train some of the people from forces and give the opportunity, whether it be in our centre or regional, have some sort of qualified person that knows what they're doing, can assist us when we go down onto deployments and make it a lot easier. So the consistency, and we go to drive for consistency. And this is it. If we're going on deployments, before any officers set foot on that force, they actually know what they're getting, who's in charge, who their MALO is in their section, to be able to contact them, because we have it wherefore we've turned up at hotels and we've done hotels, and rightly so, I wouldn't probably put my dog in the hotel that's in there if I'm honest, and people will understand and they'll know who's on that deployment, which hotel I'm talking about. That shouldn't happen. This day and age, that shouldn't happen. So let's get to, let the MALOs are there, they're done at source, they're at the beginning. So let's go forward and get this set up so we can give our officers the best chance and try to move forward.
And I think we're quite excited that MPOC are working with us in that delivery. And it might be we're going to work towards delivering a course for them to help professionalise the MALOs as well. And we will see the benefits for our members off the back of that. So working together with MPOC, we're keen that we're going to be able to pull something together there. And like Richie says, achieve better consistency. But Richie, how do you see the welfare vans fitting into that going forward?
So again, when we look at the wellbeing impact assessment, and a part of that is it's type of a check-off list. So you'll go through, have we sorted the MALO, have you done that, have you done this? Part of it, have you thought, is this bigger deployment where you could need welfare vans? So we took the time out to produce a catalogue, and basically this catalogue will be all the welfare vans that we currently have, where they're based and what they have, because some of them may have the facilities of toilet, some of them are just catering vehicles and they have their own coffee making facilities, as you would find at Costa or at other venues, and you would have, I had to put that out there, you would have on the back of that, or they'd have a grill and they can cater. So they're not just solely for respite, there's different types that can assist, and we've seen them go really well. So in this catalogue, forces can say, actually, I could do with that vehicle because we need, and I could do that. We've also put together a list of what they would need, how many crew, what facilities they can do, where we would need to park them and stuff like that. So it makes it a lot easier for the host force to come, I need that, that's how much it's going to cost me, this is where it's going to be, actually, let's put it in at source. Again, before we set foot anywhere on the soil that we need to be, it needs to be there. So we put together this document. The document is now available. So when any mutual aid and there is some coming up and we know that, we will send it in advance to the host force and ask them, are you considering this as well-being? Because we do know forces, don't get me wrong, are really good at the minute of doing it, and they'll have feeding stations and the food for mutual aid, and it is good. It's just those environments where you find people stood for long periods of times, and it's easier for a van to come and pull up to somebody. They can get in, have a break, and then jump back out again without having to have that rotation. It does assist.
Cheers, Richie. I mean, and the final topic we wanted to touch on that we're excited and we've worked hard towards is the area of allowances. Yep. We've really listened to our members in this area who have consistently told us that some of the allowances that we toil under are simply not fit for purpose. And it's a view you shouldn't be surprised to hear that partners in MPOC and the MPCC agree with us and share for some of those allowances. The main one I'm talking about is the overnight away from home allowance and the hardship allowance. But before we move on to that, it'd be remiss not to just touch on a couple of other areas of allowances that we're keen to do some work on, but we appreciate need deft, careful handling as we progress. And one of them is the protection allowance. Not many people might be aware of it, but it's an allowance brought in through necessity for a certain cadre of officers primarily deployed in core protection duties on mutual aid. And there's a uniqueness to our regulations, and let's be blunt about it. It's the law, it's written down, it's how we have to be treated. We'd all like to do something else, and in the past, chiefs have used their income generation for mutual aid and made this payment and made that payment. And that's benefited members in this force and that force, but not every force. And it's a level of inconsistency that some of our members benefit from, but actually causes difficulties perhaps more broadly. So we're hoping to move away from that. But the protection allowance was brought about because officers in receipt of that allowance aren't allowed to access other allowances when it comes to mutual aid. And yet, some of them, it's their day-to-day job. So when they do deploy, the PMB circulars that govern allowances say you're not allowed to access the traditional allowances. So we understand why it's there and the important role that it does. We just want to take a look at it and some of the consistency or inconsistency it delivers for the broader membership that sometimes comes under its banner. Because one of the uniqueness to that allowance is if you're in receipt of the protection allowance on duty, you're expressly forbidden from accessing some other allowances. And that leads to inconsistencies. People doing the same job in the same area, staying in the same accommodation and yet being in receipt of different allowances. So we stick a pin in that. We're keen to do some work, but we will tread carefully because it exists for a reason. Another area we're keen to do some work on, it's been mentioned earlier today, are the inspecting ranks and the amount of responsibility that our members in the inspecting ranks hold when they deploy on mutual aid, often wearing a series of different hats and skill sets. And it's only the good graces of chiefs up and down the country that lead to bonuses being paid. We're keen to do some work there and get that on a more, dare I say it, professional footing, where it's less at the whim and the goodwill of the force, and it's more the law, it's more what the allowances say. So we're keen to do some work there. But one of the areas we are keen and we're making progress on is the overnight away from home allowance. It'll be known to all of our members out there. It was brought in when the Hertfordshire agreement was taken off us during reforms, and basically says if you are overnight away from home, then you're able to claim an allowance. And if you claim that allowance and your accommodation is substandard, you can claim additional hardship allowance. The codependency of those two allowances is a disgrace in this modern age. That's simply not fit for purpose. Standards of accommodation vary rapidly, greatly across the country. The G7 deployment down in Cornwall, a lovely part of the country, right at the peak of tourist season with very little notice, the accommodation standards varied massively through necessity. So we must do all we can to level that as much as possible. And the requirement for immediate deployment has been jerry-rigged and manipulated through PMB circulars to make it a relatively difficult bar to reach. And if you don't reach the bar of being available for immediate deployment, potentially you're not able to access the overnight away from home allowance, and therefore you can't access the hardship allowance. In contrast, we've mentioned it already, Police Scotland, they work under different regs. they have a far more equitable and sensible solution when it comes to allowances. There's no interdependency. It clearly states what held in reserve is available for immediate deployment, being required to stay away from home, and if the accommodation you're staying in doesn't reach the right standard. So we've worked hard through our National Secretary and his team. We've drawn together an evidence paper that's been submitted to the PCF, Police Consultative Forum, advocating a move for England and Wales to the Scottish model. If it's legitimate use of taxpayers' money for colleagues from north of the border doing the same job as Richie and I, down in Cornwall, for example, to be in receipt of X, then surely it's legitimate for officers from England and Wales to be in receipt of X as well. Because the difference between the two presently is on your best day with our current allowances for this area, you receive £80 for the difficulties of staying in substandard accommodation, performing a difficult role. And next door could be an officer from Police Scotland, through no fault of their own, come to support the operation, doing exactly the same role. Their allowances total £210. It's all taxpayers' money. It's not fair, it's not consistent. And we're keen to see change in that area. And through the National Secretary, our Chief Negotiator, we're going to start advocating that position, which we've already worked behind the scenes, socialising it with some of the key chiefs in this area. So there'll be a no surprises approach. But hopefully, the next time we get together in a setting such as this, we're keen to bring some positive news around a move away from the not fit for purpose allowance that away from home currently is, towards the newly advocated Scottish model.
Yeah, it's right. You said, as Steve said, we've been on deployments where I've been stood next to an officer from a different force. It's just a bordering force, and they're getting paid more because their force on a rest day are getting paid an additional amount of money where the force itself hasn't been paid it. So you think, well, I'm on a rest day, but how can the colleague sat next to me, who's in my neighbouring force, be getting paid that? And it is only the women, the chief constables, and sometimes you see it constantly, is one chief will go in a region, will go, I'll pay that just as goodwill, and it's a snowball effect. But we shouldn't have to be doing that. This day and age, it should be in this document, ready to go and law-abiding and legally binded.
And what we have seen is, for the first time, we've seen other chiefs almost policing themselves. When one or two chiefs step away from the agreed position, they're referencing the principle of the framework of principles, and they're almost being brought back into line by their peers, which helps us all deliver better consistency for the members, which is something, as I say, we're really keen to deliver as much as possible.
We've got time, we've got about 6 or 7 minutes left. A few questions that have come in. You've kind of touched on much of this, but maybe some clarity. One here, do you think chief officers would be happy staying in some of the accommodation they expect federated rank officers to stay in while on mutual aid? I think I can guess your answer there.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. But what the chiefs will do is they'll point to the not fit for purpose allowances and say, these are the circumstances under which I can pay. Because if the chief takes it on their own back and pays it off their own back, they can't then bill the Home Office for these deployments. And so that money comes from their own forces. And as we know, there isn't a force in the country that's not pressed for finance.
Yeah, of course.
And it's almost unfair to put the chief in that position, but I don't think the chiefs would accept much of it.
No, I think, the last deployment, we've sent videos and pictures direct to our chief officer team locally, and they've gone, we're paying it, because they've seen the substandard.
But it's that grim.
It was that grim.
Wow.
Yeah.
One here, can you give any specific examples of what the Federation has done to improve conditions for officers deployed on mutual aid away from their families?
I think we've touched on it recently with the welfare vans and support that we have, and the framework of principles and striving for our consistency. The welfare vans, like I say, we've put them out there. We've given officers that in remote locations opportunity. They were never there 10, 15 years ago. It wasn't available. And personally, like I said before, chief officers should be looking at this and thinking, we'll assist where we can in supporting the local federations to provide these vans, even in forces themselves.
I think another good example of that could be Rondoletto, the Northern Ireland deployment. Some very obvious and real security concerns meant that our members were often confined to base.
Yep.
And what we're able to do was take an interpretation of the regs that allowed for access to a broader mutual aid allowances in the off-duty periods of that deployment, that meant officers previously in receipt of the protection allowance, when they weren't on duty, were able to access another form of allowance that previously we'd not really considered. That was through work with ourselves and MPOC reaching an agreed position. So, and we only do that, we're only aware of that if we're deployed on the scene at the time, getting the real-time feedback from the members and trying to make a difference on the day.
One here, many officers deployed out of force often miss out on an away home allowance due to forces raising routine inquiries or no requirements to be available for immediate deployment as a loophole to avoid paying officers. What is being done to ensure that all officers required to remain out of force overnight are afforded some manner of allowance?
There's no getting away from the uncomfortable truth that PMB circulars stipulate if you're deployed away from home as part of routine inquiries or for training purposes, and you're not allowed under our allowances to access the away from home allowance. We can't undo that presently. What we would like to see is a move away from that position, which I believe is 2010 or 13. It's a mature position in terms of age. We'd like to see us move away from that and move towards something that's more fit for purpose in this day and age. And we'd be keen to have the conversation with chiefs around, does that include training? Does that include routine? What is routine inquiries in this day and age? We're all omni-skilled and expected to do many, many things. So I think we'd be keen to see movement on that.
From Paul Della, who says, if the Federation is looking to save money, should we be funding welfare vans around the country when it's the force's responsibility for the welfare of officers and the cost should be borne by the force, not the Federation? So, shouldn't forces be providing proper food and drinks and facilities for members, not the Federation?
Absolutely, forces should be providing it. Absolutely not. The Federation member subscription should not be used to provide it. But there is, as Paul well knows, there's a middle space there where local branches have got access to funds generated by their own means. If they choose to use those to provide better welfare provision by way of setting an example to the force of this is how it could be done, Paul knows, I don't fall out with that view. But I alluded to this earlier in the presentation. There is a legitimate view, as Paul articulates there, that we shouldn't be in that space. We should be applying pressure for the job to deliver it, full stop.
And another one here, why have the Federation not funded welfare vans across the regions to prevent the postcode lottery for officers, centrally funded and maintained for the benefit of all members?
Well, I guess that's the polar opposite, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is, and like I say, and going back to Paul's point, it's absolutely right. And one of it that raised when requesting our van back in our force was going to the Chief Constable, this is what we want to do, how can you assist? What can you, and some forces, some chiefs have paid their vans. Some forces will pay the insurance, will pay the fuel, they'll contribute, they'll pay the tax and the maintenance of the vans. It's about that common ground, because we all know we'd love if there was that money enough to go, yes, go and buy them. It's great, and chiefs could buy them. But it's as Steve said, if we don't do it, then our members are the only ones that are not. And I've seen the goodness of these. So as much as the chiefs should be paying for it, we can assist, and we can assist in ways with different funding that's available locally as their resources.
I think that's a really powerful point, actually, and I do come down squarely on perhaps the other side of the debate to Paul and others in this area in terms of who should be doing that. And for me, I always come back to the point of we shouldn't have to do it, but we're in a position to do it. We've got the funds to do it, and in doing it, we can demonstrate a material benefit to our members. And for me, that's legitimate use.
Good one to finish on as well. With growing demand on policing, do you think mutual aid will become a daily occurrence and therefore the norm?
That is a good one, but
is there more of it now?
There's probably...
You mentioned the big events where, you know, COP and
there'll be big events constantly, as you know, and it could be from political events to the big ones like COP26. So they are becoming more regular. And I know we've got probably a few planned coming up in this next year as well.
undoubtedly they are becoming more common as forces are being required to do more with less.
Yep.
Yeah.
Their ability to what we call consume their own smoke and completely police an operation under their own means, they're becoming few and far between. Very few forces are able to do that. Our biggest force was unable to completely provide an operation without the need for mutual aid. So it does happen. It is happening more frequently. I guess, are we ever going to reach the stage where it's the norm rather than the exception? I think we're away from that. And there are some quite strict controls, things that forces have to be able to demonstrate before, through that process of accessing MPOC in the centre, to get support. There's certain things that chief officer teams locally have to be able to demonstrate in order for the support to come. And that's right and proper as well, because everyone's on the bones of the backside.
And just a very final point, Steve, you had that list there, the bullet point list of what you're looking for. I mean, summing it up, it's clarity, it's a sense of this is the framework, it's not splintered across different regs and rules around the country. How hopeful are you that you can get all of that into action at some point soon?
I'd be a bit of a fool if I sat here and set myself up to fail, you know. So everything I believe passionately is deliverable on that list. It's not all within our control. We only have to mention the allowances and our requirement. We're not in the PRRB presently for good reason. And so our only access to changing the allowance is a particular path with the PCF, and that ultimately is beyond our control. But we can hand on heart say that we, in the mutual aid world, are doing all we can to advance all of those points with the objective of delivering better consistency and outcomes for our members.
I would like to say that we could probably, hopefully, with the mutual aid liaison officers, have a training package this time next year. We're up and running. So, I mean, I'm more than happy to say that's one of my aims and goals, to try and get that up and running before this time next year.
Listen, Richie, thank you. Steve, good to see you as well. Thank you, guys.